9 to 8 now, with possibly thousands of people leaving the care sector, and that's something we're going to look at in the next hour. The government is announcing plans to strengthen day one employment rights and increase productivity of businesses for those who are just starting work. Workers in this country will get more choice over when and where they work under new proposals. It will be explained now by Conservative MP and Small Business Minister Paul Scully, who joins me now. Can you spell out what this would mean then directly for my listeners? Good morning, Minister.
Morning. Actually, I was here, Nick, to talk about the issue with net zero, the COP26.
I'm terribly sorry, that's the briefing that's been given, but we will turn to that. OK. I have here with your name, but the government also introducing day one right to 1 week's leave. But let's talk about what you need to. Then what is it you want to address as regards COP?
Well, what we've got, Nick, is that we know from our experience in London and cities around the UK that it's really important that we tackle issues to become sustainable. And we are playing our international leadership role to invest £27.5 million, reconfigure some of our overseas development assistance to allow developing cities to develop technologies and practices that will make their cities more sustainable and go to net zero by 2050.
So I was speaking with Mayor Andy Street earlier this hour. Is this such as transport initiatives and matters such as that, Minister?
Yeah, it's exactly looking at that. It's looking at the transport initiatives. It's looking at the buildings themselves and these kind of things as well. So absolutely, because it's really good that we play our role in helping those cities become sustainable and net zero. And actually, for the UK, it may well come up with good practice that we can bring back to London and other cities across the UK.
When you consider how many cities there are in the country, although £27.5 million is a lot of money, and I'd be very happy to be in receipt of it, one could argue it's not a lot given the size of the issue. Is this like a sort of tester or a taster, Minister?
It is there to kickstart. It's not clearly £27.5 million is not going to solve the problem in developing cities around the world. It's there to start that process, to kickstart the thinking, the development of technologies, the development of practices to be able to, in order to be able to do so.
All right. One city, of course, that we were talking about, we can talk about, is Glasgow. I have to ask you, why do you suppose the Prime Minister made such a hasty exit yesterday, Minister?
Well, I don't know about the Prime Minister's diary, but clearly, he's tearing around the place. He's got a lot of conflicting and competing priorities that he's got to tackle.
Yes. Don't you think he needs to make some form of statement about the stories that are not going to go away, the headlines that are making all sorts of allegations about senior MPs and other Conservative MPs?
Well, I think what he and government have said, first of all, about last week's situation that started this conversation, that it was a mistake to have allowed the actions of one person to be conflated with the changes that are required, frankly, around the standards procedure to introduce an appeals procedure, as we do in a different type of complaints procedure with the House. But he also talked about the fact yesterday in his press conference that it's absolutely right that members of Parliament have their first priority their constituents and representing their constituents. It's a real privilege to be an MP, which is a privilege that I feel day in, day out.
But you can't deliver for your constituents from the British Virgin Islands, can you?
Well, I'm not going to speak on what Geoffrey Cox did in there or otherwise. I mean, you clearly don't need to be in the constituency day in, day out, but nonetheless, you need to be available to your constituents and contactable by your constituents.
But on the one hand, you have the Prime Minister saying that people like yourself and others, you must prioritise for the good people of Sutton and Cheam. But the others, we hear that the Chief Whip authorised Sir Geoffrey Cox to go and work from the BVI.
Well, I think I don't know the ins and outs of it. I don't know the whipping situations. What I do know is over the last few months, we've had an odd situation that's only just now been restored, that we were, many of us were voting by proxy because we weren't able to come into Parliament freely. Like in many workplaces, it was constrained. That's now come back to normal largely, and so I expect attendance to be coming back to normal.
How are these allegations, right or wrong that they might be, how are they to be countered, would you say, Minister?
Well, I think in terms of what the situation we've just been talking about, I think it's right that MPs are able to have second jobs, but it's what the second jobs are that I think are really key, because you get lots of examples when you have lawyers that still practice and they can then bring that experience back to the legislation that we are bringing forward and they are scrutinising. You have people in public service that are still practicing as nurses and dentists and doctors. You have people in business that actually allow them to bring a business acumen and experience to bear in our economic considerations. But nonetheless, but wrongdoing needs to be so paid advocacy and the like needs to be absolutely stamped out.
Okay, so we do need to rework the system.
Yeah, I think we need to need to look at it, and that's what we're trying to build a cross-party consensus in order to do so. I think it needs to be done in a fair way, which is why, as I say, last week, although it got conflated, the root of what we were trying to do last week was right in having an appeals process so that you can feel there is a natural justice there. Because if you complain about someone's behaviour in Parliament, for example, or like bullying and harassment and the like, there's a totally different system which has an appeals process on it. So we actually have two standard systems, one of which has an appeals process, one doesn't. So we need to, as I say, make sure that we get that right so that people can see justice being done.
You're small business minister. The many small businesses are care or residential homes, and it is said that there is already a shortage of tens of thousands, and that could be added to by this ruling that these folk, the workers there, have to have had their necessary vaccinations. Are you convinced this is the right path?
Yeah, I think those workers are there to protect the most vulnerable in our society, actually, the people that are most likely to be hospitalised or indeed, unfortunately, die from COVID. And that remains the case. We're still living with COVID, and it's still a very live situation. So it was right that we gave people 12 weeks to go through that process. And, I'd hope that people would, if they haven't had their vaccination, go back and reconsider and get that vaccination done if they want to continue working with those vulnerable people. But
what about vulnerable people who might not now be afforded the same level of care because the staffing just simply isn't there, Minister?
Well, we'll have to see. But I think what we want to do is it's little point with having people having care of people with people that may unfortunately help transmit the disease and send them to hospital. So it's a slightly circular discussion. We want to make sure that the people that are receiving care can be as safe as possible.
Okay. And lastly, the front page of one of the newspapers today, hundreds of companies set up after the government's furlough scheme was established have claimed £26.6 million from the taxpayer, some of it is believed fraudulently. The furlough scheme, obviously it had to be rushed through, but it wasn't tight enough, was it?
Well, I think you were right in saying that we had to work really, really quickly on this. We had to deliver some really big schemes at incredible pace, which has protected jobs and livelihoods. But nonetheless, we've got fraud systems in place. We have the National Crime Centre, we have the HMRC that have robust fraud procedures, and we'll be investigating each and every one of those.
Because there are 340 of the firms were created on or after March the 1st last year. That was when the furlough scheme came into operation. 3 of the 5 addresses were most commonly used are linked to formation agents. There seems to be a scam of huge proportion gone on here, Minister.
Well, I think formation agencies have their place because, and I've used them in the past, frankly. When I was running small businesses, it's a nice, easy way of actually setting up a limited company. But nonetheless, that ease can allow for abuse. And that's why the fraud procedures that we've got in place with HMRC and other agencies are robust enough to be able to investigate that.
And good luck with the funding programme for some of the major cities in the country. I'm sorry about the slight misstep with that right at the beginning. Small Business Minister Paul Scully, thank you for appearing here on LBC, where at 8 o'clock news is next.
On your radio, on Global Player, and
Play LBC.
Leading Britain's conversation. This is LBC.
From Global's newsroom at 8 o'clock, the mandatory COVID vaccination policy for care home workers in England has come into force.